Welcome to the Bad Natives podcast. Today we spoke about the war in Iran and how it's affecting us across the continent. We spoke about Patrice Lumumba, the 93-year-old Belgian who is now facing trial for his murder. And we also spoke about the war in Sudan, why it's not being focused on as much. Charles has a native doctor friend in Ogun State in Lagos. We have Koi and San people getting dignified burials in South Africa and a host of a lot of other things. Make sure you follow, listen, subscribe, share this, comment, and I always say share it with your ex, share it with your best friend, and share it with your favorite coworker. Enjoy. Good morning or good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're listening. Welcome to the Bad Natives. I am Adesu Agiwal-Sage here in Lagos, Nigeria.
I'm Ferial Hafaji in Johannesburg.
And with the Bad Natives out of Nairobi, Kenya, Charles Onyango Obo.
Welcome everyone. Today we are going to talk about how the war in Iran and tensions in the Middle East are going to affect Africa. We are also going to talk about Patrice Lumumba's case, his death, and now Belgian national possibly facing charges in regards to his case. But let's first speak about the war in Iran, the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, and how it is affecting all of us across the continent. Welcome to Bob Kabushenka, the baddest native.
Yeah, I came flying from across town, but I am happy to catch you guys. How have you guys been?
Good. We're just doing our intros right now, and we're about to dive straight into the war in Iran, how it's affecting all of us, how it's shaking up, and then we'll talk about Patrice Lumumba. But let's start with the war in Iran and gas and oil prices. I have heard that Kenya's retailers might be running out of petrol shortly. There are lines in India. The Philippines have declared a state of emergency, and Japan is releasing its oil reserves. Charles, how's it looking in Kenya and in East Africa?
Well, here it was always expected that at about this point we would begin to see, the shortages biting. It's not right now. Probably the greater worry is what is happening with LNG, and so everyone has stocked up. Prices at the pump haven't yet inched up, although we're beginning to see the signs of the shortage. But I think that over the next few days you'll see prices on average rising by anything between 30 to 75, even 100% across several parts of the continent. So the reality is finally going to bite.
The reality is already biting in Nigeria, and we have seen all sorts of memes, including people using their legs to drive their cars because they can't fill their tanks with any petrol. Feria, what does it look like in South Africa?
No, not so good. Hey, next week pump prices go up to unbelievable levels, and everybody's predicting that it's going to have inflationary impacts. And we were hoping for a good year with decent growth going up to 2%. The prediction now, Adesuwa, is that in fact we'll see interest rate hikes, and there are already runs on pumps. So petrol station owners saying to people, please stop panic buying, but that's happening.
I mean, everyone is afraid. The saying goes that when America sneezes, we all catch a cold. Bob, have you caught a cold yet?
We have got COVID. What are you talking about, a cold? Well, this is not a
I
cold.
actually want to ask you, Bob, because Donald Trump, it looks like he's looking for an exit ramp. It does on one hand look like he's trying to exit this conflict. On the other hand, they've sent the elite 82nd towards the Middle East, 1,000 of them. Their expertise is in parachuting behind enemy lines. So on one hand, he's telling us that they're negotiating, that Iran gave them a present, that he wouldn't let us know what the present was. But on the other hand, it seems that things are escalating. How do you read this? Do you think Trump is just manipulating the markets to try and keep energy prices down, or do you think we're seeing this war might perhaps draw to a close soon?
I think what has died in the Middle East is trust. Nobody trusts anyone anymore. So, and I was watching some conversations about Iran, and the Western media and the Western pundits cannot believe that they have to rely on comments from Iran to confirm whether what Trump has said is the truth or not. So that's how ironic it is. that but I think for Africa, and again, I want to refer to a post that Charles did on X, that the most profound thing about Africa is that the silence has been so loud about this war that Africa doesn't even have a position, can't even articulate any kind of position. Well, there is an upside on some of these things, which Furio always likes us to look at. There's been an uptick or an uptick on our aviation in terms of people diverting routes. So I think finally people like Kenya Airways are filling up their airplanes. Ethiopian can barely handle, and even with increased prices. Now, uh, the twisted me is that what this is going to force us to do as a continent is that there's going to be a rethink of our consumption culture. Whether we like it or not, there's not going to be enough loose change for people to live large. And that any government now on the African continent, if you're not an oil producer and you are not adjusting your budgets right now, if you are not beginning to think austerity right now, if you're not even having that debate today, you're going to face a significant cash crunch because you're going to have imported inflationary pressures. You're going to have shortage of commodities or whatever, or imported stuff that you need to just function your economies. It's going to be very difficult to run public affairs. Will the war go on? I think if I was an actuary sitting and trying to figure out the risk element, I would bet on the war continuing for a long time. Because, and I have only one reason for making that argument, that both Iran and Russia have zero interest in this war ending because for the first time, they're making a lot of money off the war. Iran has increased the amounts it charges for people using the Straits of Hormuz, but Trump has removed sanctions on Iran's oil in order to ease energy pressures. And he has done the same thing to Russia. So, what is the motivation for them to stop fighting? So there is, and then Iran now realizes it has a major geographical advantage. It's not just the Strait of Hormuz, it is the terrain of their country. It makes it very difficult to deploy troops and overrun the country and control it. So
Yes.
and yeah, so that's what I would say. I think that I would bet on the war continuing longer than than it ending quickly. Because even if it ends quickly, even if it ended tomorrow, there's still so many unresolved issues that Iran will want to extract out of both the Gulf, its Gulf neighbors, and the US, that the problems we're facing now will continue for at least the next 2 to 3 months, even if the war ended today.
Definitely. I mean, Goldman Sachs did say that they're expecting oil prices will remain high, even if the war ended today. They expect it will remain high till 2027. And that's putting a lot of countries under unexpected burdens. But I think one part of the war that a lot of people haven't spoken about is one thing what is going on in Lebanon. Now, over 1,000 people have been killed. I just saw, a report, a family of three, including their baby, 3-year-old daughter, was killed in an apartment in Beirut. And this is not in southern Lebanon or even in the southern suburbs of Beirut. It's in an area that people thought was safe. Israel has also started speaking about taking territory from Lebanon, and of course, they've set up 5 bases. Feriel, looking at this angle of the conflict, do you think that this is something that we should be raising more alarm about?
Most definitely. I think that what's happening under the cover of the Iran war is that you're beginning to see Israel executing on the greater Israel strategy that it's always had. You can see it by the incursions into the West Bank and by the attacks on Lebanon. So lots of these things happen under cover of war. The war in Ukraine also getting worse. And if you look at each of these, if they do become forever wars, they really do portend a very different a globe for us, and a much less a more unsafe one. I wonder about what calculations Iran may be making, Bob, and if those are not slightly Machiavellian, because I mean, if you just read of the hardships facing Iranian people, it was the hardest Nowruz, the New Year, in a very long time. You know, there's lots of Iranian people living in South Africa, and if you chat to them, the hardships of their families, I think, would, I hope, make their leadership think about beginning, because it looks at the moment like they do have a slight upper hand, is to also seek an off ramp and to begin to reignite relationships with perhaps with Oman. Those seem to have been blasted by the war, but it was the key mediator ahead of the first attacks by the U.S. and Israel.
Honestly, I definitely think we are in a very scary era. As you said, Western journalists can't believe that they can't trust the words coming out of the American president's mouth at all. That his announcements usually coincide with the closing or the opening of the markets. The CNN ran that. The Iranians are saying he's trying to manipulate the markets and that they're not in any
The
conversation.
Iranians are saying he's engaging in fake news.
Yes, they've used his own terms against him. I saw an Al Jazeera headline saying Trump is speaking to himself, i.e., I don't know who he's talking to here. He's trying to play it up to be like, oh, it's because there's a regime change. They don't really know who to speak to because there's no clear leader. But the leadership of Iran is saying, we know who we are and we have no idea who you're talking to. But I think, going also just going beyond that, I saw a Fox News report on spring break because it's spring break in America, and all these college students just being very unaware. They said they've never heard the word Ayatollah before. They don't know what's going on with the war. Maybe gas prices increase a little bit or not, but it doesn't seem that America itself is as affected, or the American citizens are as affected by the conflicts that they start. Charles, do you think that this is going to really change how the world interacts with Americas, even the Gulf states, right? Because you see that the distrust is not only going one way, it seems that everyone is slightly confused. Do you think this will change how people relate with America, especially considering Mahama's statement in New York on Tuesday, where he spoke about America also trying to erase Black history and what that would do, the ramifications it can have for Black people across the continent?
Oh, oh yes. I mean, yes, yeah. I think just brand America has really suffered quite, a lot, and the to the issue you started with domestically, gas prices I think have gone up, what, 60 cents or something, and they are beginning to scream. But I was reading something which came out last week. The the media has looked at the numbers, and if you look at America's books, America is bankrupt. It's got, before you count other things, it's got 8 times more liabilities than assets. Technically it's worse than Zimbabwe's during the worst times of Mugabe. It's really. I mean, if it was a third world or an African country now, it would be in an IMF's structural program. So yes, I think that the brand has suffered, and domestically, I think it's going to bite. I mean, you just seen this Florida of all people. I think there have been two special elections. which have been won by the Democrats. I mean, the Democrats are winning elections in places they haven't won in 46, 60 years. So I think that domestically, we are, they're also beginning to see, uh, they are beginning to see those effects. So yes, and when these things now begin to kick in, these, the high oil prices, the high fertilizer prices, and all this, that really people are going to blame this one on the Americans. And so, in that sense, I think they should really prepare themselves for a period, very, very difficult period. In Africa, just like we have done with all Iran's friends haven't said anything, will not speak much, but I think that the ground is going to shift considerably. We have already seen it in some of the Gallup polling already, for the first time in the majority of countries in Africa and the world. I mean, I think China has got a higher preference score than the US. So you'll continue to see that tendency.
Yeah, and Bob, do you feel that the world is going to blame America for this?
Of course, that's why the world is quiet. Because if you recall, during the Iraq War, which was another war of choice, countries were lining up to impress America that they were behind the war on terror. So America managed to frame that narrative, and so there were countries declaring how they were, the axis of evil and so on. Many African countries did that. Those that had been associated with terrorists on 9/11 distanced themselves to avoid the consequences. So part of the silence is that, in a family, children cannot tell their abusive father directly about his behavior, uh, but what they do is they start avoiding him, or they give him short answers. So,
Mm.
so this is what we have. That everyone is so shocked about America's own behavior that they're not saying anything. But I, having said that, I really, for me, want to stay. Now, the world can blame the Americans, but as an African, I am blaming our African leadership again. I think they've missed a powerful opportunity to, first of all, define Africa's own position, because there are real issues we're going to face. First of all, there is a great opportunity that now the Middle Eastern countries that were fomenting war in Africa are going to rethink their investment on that front. But secondly, we need to think about what this means for the middle powers investments in Africa. For instance, Qatar is invested in the aviation industry in Rwanda. UAE is trying to find its way into the refinery petroleum industry in Uganda. I think they were also interested in developing ports, I think in Tanzania. So the question, and they were also a big source of, uh, actually, let me just put it crudely. They were the money lenders of the international finance system. So where people couldn't go to international finance, these guys were now offering alternatives, not the best terms, but they're offering them. I mean, that's aside from oil, fertilizer, and all of the other things. So you don't, there is, I don't feel that as an African, the African leadership is giving me, is providing an understanding of the world through the lenses of African leadership. So where do we stand? Where should we stand? Countries like Mozambique, countries like Tanzania, countries that have resources that could come in, what are they going to do about it? You don't hear anybody talking. In fact, the more interesting post that I saw was some an indication that some senior army officers from Eritrea went to visit Tigray, Mekele. So is there a potential war between Ethiopia and Eritrea? uh, we should be discussing. There should be a special AU sitting right now with the heads of states to determine and discuss what does this mean for flashpoints, for Sudan, for Somalia, for all of these things. You get there, African leaders behaving as if there's nothing happening in the world. You
You
don't
know,
see or hear from
yeah, sometimes I hope that there is wisdom in waiting and seeing where the cards fall, or
him.
where
Or
will lie.
opportunism.
Yeah, I hope there is some wisdom in that, and also some things have been giving me some sort of joy, because I now see that Dangote refinery is selling more to more
Yes.
countries on the continent,
We're
right?
looking to import from Nigeria, from Dangote now. Huh?
Yes, our jet fuel is they're selling more than they've ever sold before. Jet fuel coming out of Nigeria. It's the resurgence of Bonnie Light, and I'm hoping that whoever is in charge is thinking about where the cars will lie after all of this. What is this shakeup going to mean for us? And I'm hoping they're not speaking because they're thinking about what to say. Not that they're not speaking because they're not paying attention to what's going on. Because you're right, we have to think about energy sustain, like us being our own providers particularly when it comes to energy. We have to think about infrastructure across the continent. We have to think about these flashpoints, like you said, in Sudan. But I also think there is something to be said for the fact that this might I'm not entirely sure this new world that we're entering and how it's shaping up, and if it's not better for us to perhaps isolate, perhaps not be so reliant on our outside partners. I want to ask Farrell about how the ports are looking in South Africa, because I've been reading that a lot of shipping is being diverted, to pass
Mm.
through the Cape, because of the crisis in the Middle East. Nigeria, we just had our state visit to the UK. There was a lot of pomp and pageantry there, but the biggest thing that came out of that is a 746 million pound deal. They call it a deal, it's a loan, it's an export finance loan, to revamp our ports here. Because as I said before, we didn't even have the capacity for our ports to be a place for things to be diverted to because they're already choked up. Are the ports in South Africa, the infrastructure in South Africa, is it rising to meet the moment, Ethereal?
So you are already seeing an increase in maritime traffic. It's much more expensive to take that journey, but it is happening because it's an option, and there's definitely been massive investment in the port of Cape Town. It's not where it should be. Fruit exporters will tell you that it's still slow, that the berthing and many aspects of it haven't been sufficiently modernized. But I think what we have, Adesu, is a moment where reinvestment in the ports meets a changed geopolitical maritime landscape, and you will see the upside of that beginning to happen. It's really also important that our ports are improved quite quickly because we're so reliant on fertilizer imports. And that we're going to have to ensure that we tap alternative markets for those as well, in the coming months.
Mm. So I want us to, segue away from this topic for a bit because I do know we want to talk about Patrice Lumumba, who was killed on the 17th of January 1961 in Katanga, by the CIA and Belgium. It's a very odd world that we live in right now, because as a historian who has been talking about, let's not focus on the master narrative, and America's not always the good guys. Now I'm facing a crisis where people believe America is the source of all evil in Nigeria. The last Bad Nations episode we did where I spoke about Boko Haram, have you guys seen the comments? People are like, it's the CIA and Mossad. I was like, no, guys, it's Boko Haram.
Yeah.
but but there are places where America has done evil, and one of those is in the death of Patrice Lumumba. I remember reading the CIA when they tried to kill him with poison toothpaste. They tried many different methods before he was finally killed, unfortunately, and then his body was dissolved in acid. Very horrific. Charles, can you speak, especially to some of the young bad natives who might not know about Patrice Lumumba, can you speak a little bit about the hero that he was and the circumstances surrounding his death and what this new case is? Is it justice that a 93-year-old Belgian lowly diplomat might be facing charges? Is this justice?
Well, Lumumba was he was an inspirational figure, Pan African nationalist figure. He was the first elected leader, independence leader of the DR Congo. But he was on the left. He was a progressive. So, like you said, They got him. They handed him over to the Katanga secessionists in a plot involving his army commander Mobutu, who eventually became a president. So he was killed together with some of his comrades, I think Morris Mpolo and Joseph Okito. They were buried and then they were exhumed quickly and their bodies were dissolved in sulfuric acid. And the only thing that was left, there's a Belgian officer, let me see, his name is Gerard Sotte. He kept his tooth. It's the only thing that was left of that. So what has happened now, a Belgian court has delivered a ruling that a gentleman who is now 93 years old, he's called Étienne Davignon, will be tried for war crimes for his role in basically, sending messages and seizing and conveying, Lumumba to the secessionists who killed him. But the guy the trial is beginning next year. The guy is 93, and there are a lot of questions about what does it mean. Is Belgium just finding a guy who was a low level? The guy was actually virtually an intern, and he's the one who is being charged for a crime, and the Belgian state is basically hiding behind him. So that is where we are.
Bob, you said last week, I believe you said they got the wrong guy. Who's the right guy?
Yes,
No, 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 no. I didn't say that, man. That sounds like something Bob would say.
I believe that was
exactly.
Bob.
It
Yes,
was
Bob.
Bob.
It
Mm.
was Bob. Bob, you said they had
Yeah,
the wrong guy. Who's the right guy?
yes, because there was a self-confessed murderer, a former CIA officer, I think a chap called Devlin, who is even actually on recording. I think he's since died.
Yeah.
He's the one who first took full responsibility for the plot and how they killed Lumumba. So, like I said, it's the wrong person, and Charles has nailed it by saying that it's really just the Belgian state trying to very late and in a very very small way to atone for one of the biggest crimes against African people. But for me, I feel that the justice was done quite. So first of all, there's a very disturbing video that has come up again from the archives of how Lumumba was being chased and beaten like a common thief. Imagine an African leader that happening to him. Leave alone just even an ordinary African citizen being treated like that is humiliating enough. So, but in a sense, for me, I feel that justice was done first in the way in which his killers, the Katangese political establishment, suffered their fate. Moise Chombe died a very bad death in Algeria, and it was truly well deserved. If you look at it from that point of view, so Moise Chombe was the leader of the Katangese who killed Lumumba. The other one was Mobutu. He found a miserable end, and also I think that miserable end has continued to dog and haunt his family. So I think, in a sense, the African ancestors have done a better job of delivering justice.
The European courts, eh?
You,
The
you know
European legal system. So,
Even
and I
though,
mean,
yeah,
it's too little, too late, and it won't even mean anything. And in a way, in fact, the guy, for me now, the guy who stood like Lumumba at the CAF in Morocco did a much better job of rebuilding the Lumumba legacy and presenting him well than. I hope he's the one who embarrassed the courts in Belgium to look favorably on this issue. But I feel that it's people like that who have, those are the more substantive processes by which Lumumba can be rehabilitated. Of course, Congo has not recovered from that time and the politics of that time. You still see it today that they are unable to reach some kind of political consensus because of their politics.
yeah. I want
you
to
know
ask because you, yeah.
oh, what I wanted to say is that he continues to live so much, not only in popular culture, but Lumumba's ideas. So, a friend of mine in Kenya, her son is named Lumumba. It's a very popular name in South Africa too. And in any number of bookshops or reading circles, Lumumba is still very widely read and held up, especially, I think, by this new generation who we've highlighted across our continent. Very much a figure like Che Guevara. You know, you can kill the leaders, but you are not going to kill their ideas and their visions. Maybe not their socialist visions, but their principal visions for better post-colonial societies, for free societies. I think you can't kill those, and I've been very happy to see that. Obviously, I would like to go and see that single gold tooth that is on display in Kinshasa sometime, but it's also to, I suppose, find other ways of keeping their work and their lives alive, which I'm very always inspired to see in the case of Lumumba.
You know, Lumumba is someone who inspires me a lot, and he's one of the first, my first African heroes. And I remember I read the letter that he wrote to his wife before he was killed. And in the letter, he says that brutality will not make him bow his head, and that history will be written, but it's not the history that's taught in Brussels or Paris or Washington. And I think it is so important, you know, it's part of what we do on this podcast, but it is so important that we write our own stories, write our own histories, and of course, like, look at our heroes and try and emulate them, or try and, you know, look at them as ways that we should live. Or but I know, Bob, I feel like I already know your answer, but Bob, do you think that we have any Lumumbas right now? When you look at your African leaders of the day, you look across over 50 presidents and heads of state, do you see any Lumumba like leaders on the continent?
Yes, he happens to be a woman.
Hey.
Who's that?
Ndaitwa of Namibia. I think
Mm.
she's one of those cut from, you know, the left, has that, um, still has the original thought about the bigger Africa, and the whole what I call the liberation uh, philosophy, from the past. So yeah, there's her, um, who has been able to, who still looks at her country as a source of public service, as a source of, you know, providing leadership in that sense. So yeah, so there is a Lumumba for you in Windhoek, working for, working for her country, quite well. So there
Charles,
you
do
go.
you agree?
Yeah, I think so. But you know the you know the thing is that the you have good leaders. I mean there's some a few good leaders who are doing decent things for their country. You can about half a dozen or so. But I think just if you take the 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 leaders with the big ideas who represented um, who were able to think in ways in which they planted a philosophical seed and a vision of the continent. I think that there is actually none, and that is why for me about this trial, these Davignon's lawyers have said it is really going to be a judicial circus, and interestingly enough, I agree with them, and the reason for that is and for the reason we have said, coming 65 years later, a 93-year-old man, and he will probably show up on trial in a wheelchair. I don't see what value, and particularly if the trial is to take some years, that it will take. So, for me, therefore, to go back to this question of what, the point you raised, what is the bigger thing that we can get out of this? And the big idea, what is the big story? I think we should have a truth and reconciliation commission, gachacha kind of thing, so that rather than try this guy, we actually get him to to fill in the gaps about what happened, because I think that
Mhm.
we still have a gap about what happened, what were the last hours. who did what. So if we can get that information from this trial, rather than just, a very adversarial one, this is the criminal, and you did this, where were you, what was your role. I don't think that there is much from there. So for us, in order to fill that gap, to fill that hole in the African heart, I think that a truth and reconciliation kind of process, I don't know how they can structure that, in which he tells us what actually happened so that we can feel the narrative and tell a more complete story to the young Africans and those to come. I think that would be much more productive.
Speaking about filling in these historical gaps, because Patrice Lumumba's death is something that I researched for my other podcast. And I remember I read the account of that CIA agent who, after he left the CIA, became a mining kind of don in the Congo. He didn't leave Africa, right? He benefited. He used his CIA, what he had learned from his CIA network and all of that, to establish himself on the continent and was trading in our minerals. And he worked with some of the worst people in order to benefit from that. And also, on top of that, he also very importantly worked with the Israeli Israeli man who was also formerly in intelligence. I don't know if they ever leave Mossad, but also an Israeli businessman. And they utilized the resources of this continent for their own personal benefits. And I'm sure their families are probably somewhere in Tel Aviv or New York reaping the benefits of those millions of dollars that they extracted from the continent. And and I was reading also a book on JFK and speaking about how he was briefed about
Uh,
Lumumba's assassination.
Adesua,
Yeah,
the chap was called Lawrence Larry Devlin. He died in
that's it.
2008. Yes.
That's it. That's
Yeah.
it. And also about how JFK was briefed about Lumumba's assassination because it happened 3 days before his inauguration, but he was all down for it. And it kind of counters this image that I have or they have built around JFK. And I'm like,
Mm,
why would JFK be down with Patrice Lumumba being killed in such a
mm,
disgusting, undignified manner, right? And so it's all these histories that I think we need to speak about and more young Africans need to know because it is always tied to extraction of value and resources from the continent for their own betterment. And 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 so I understand why we have a lot of conspiracy theorists today. But so my friend sent a meme to the group, and he said that being a conspiracy theorist is popular now because you're getting proven right every single day. Like imagine 10 years ago saying that American president would be lying to manipulate the markets and reduce energy prices, but now CNN is saying it. So you don't sound like a cocker anymore. Like it's all in our faces. It's
mm.
unreal. I think we're living in unreal times. And speaking about, dignity and extraction of resources, because we've spoken about the Gulf countries, but we've also touched on Sudan. Farrell, I want you to, maybe come a little bit in here because the war
Sure.
in Sudan, I don't know if it's that people are emotionally detached, but it's not hitting the same emotional resonance across the world as perhaps what's going on in Gaza or what's going on in Iran or even Ukraine. It seems that the Sudanese have been left behind.
That's absolutely right. I was looking, Salva Kiir was in South Africa for 11 days or just a week of talks with Cyril Ramaphosa, and they were pictured holding hands, coming out, and that didn't even make a blip on our agenda here, even though it was such an important meeting. The entire process happening here has been really important. So, not only covering that, but also covering the stories of Sudan, I think is a certainly I take responsibility, a major failing on our part as mass media, as part of mass media. I think it's been completely overshadowed by the war in Iran and also Palestine, which probably also tells you that the Sudanese people don't have massive sponsors with voice who can influence the shaping of that debate, and that certainly you prompt me to go and think more deeply about that, and also to to understand what those talks that happened here last week, because they really were overshadowed in my consciousness and in, I think, all colleagues here, about what was happening with the war instead.
Bob, do you feel that it's racism that plays into this, or do you think it's history? Is it because we have heard about, for someone my age, right? I heard about Darfur when I was a kid. It seems like you keep hearing about these things, and it's not anything new. Do you think we've gotten used to this in our news cycle, so it doesn't ring as strong of a bell, or do you think there's more to it than that?
I, I, I I think, first of all, that history is cyclical. Uh, I'm beginning to think that, and that every 30 years there is an event that happens, one catastrophic event that happens and reshapes the way the world moves. I think if there is anything a young person who is watching or listening to us, they should take away, is that every 30 years, there will be, between 25 and 30 years, there will be an event that will alter the trajectory of history. And I think if anything is to go by, I think now the instruction, the writing, the teaching of history becomes extremely important. And I think young people, like you at the SUA, but even younger, you have an obligation to learn about the past from different sources and formulate your own picture. And let me just give a very quick example from an earlier thing that Firio said. Firio talked about how in southern Lebanon, the picture of the image or vision of greater Israel is now being brought to reality. But it's not the first time. They did this in 1982. They did this again. So Ariel Sharon has did it twice. So in real terms, this thing has been done and it has failed catastrophically. This is not the first time Israel is attacking its Arab neighbors. Israel has been attacking its neighbors since 1948. So my point, I guess, to you, Adesua, is that some people behave as if these things are new. These things are not new. These things have happened before. 1979, we know what happened in 1979. So I think that if I'm to relate that to what's going to happen to Sudan, is that actually, out of what has happened in Iran and the war in the Middle East, the Sudanese will probably be forced to resolve their differences and that to realize that there is no way any of them is going to come out of this with a military victory. Why? Because their sources of lethal ammunition and their ability to fund conflict is now gone. Hemeti can't sell gold to the United Arab Emirates, and the Saudis are distracted by the Gulf. So, how well can they prop up the SAF? Those are some of the things that need to be. So eventually, I feel that, okay, while I may have been railing against the failure of African leaders, I think that these happenings in other parts of the world, I mean, when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989, the war in Ethiopia ended because they then removed Mengistu. 2 years later, they were able to, Mengistu collapsed. So I think what we need to look to is what is going to be the net effect of people who have been meddling in African affairs, fomenting wars. Now that they have to go back home and sort out their own defenses and ability to fight, where does that leave the different fighting groups? And is it now possible to resolve any outcome militarily? 1989 led to the end of apartheid in South Africa. So these are interesting times. Now, at this point, when I go to talk to young people, I don't want to use a certain phrase, a certain term to refer to myself, but I tell them, that the greatest favor you can do for yourself now is to stay alive. Just please be alive at this world. Be alive long enough. Well, when we were younger, the Charleses used to tell us, please don't die of AIDS. because that was the killer then. And it has helped us to stay alive long enough to see some of these things. So please stay alive. You will remember that we had these conversations. Yeah.
And
Well,
maybe don't go on that trip to Iran, hey?
No, no, no.
no,
you,
it's very interesting because I do agree that history happens in cycles, but I do feel that there is something a bit newish about this era, and I think it's what is new about it is that we might have the fall of American hegemony. It's the fall of an empire. It's Trump is committing suicide for America's mission abroad, and I think that because that has helped shape the world
uh,
post World War II.
Adesua, sorry
Yeah.
to kick in there. When you say that, it just struck me that both to Furio and Charles, that it also means the end of agency politics as we know them, client agency politics on the African continent. And I think that's why most of these African leaders are confused. Now, who is your principal now in world politics? Who do you go to? Who do you hate?
Maybe the lesson is that that's a good thing, that clientelism will die, and then you have to build
Yeah,
agency.
yeah, yeah.
Do you actually think that clientelism will die for real?
Um, Obviously, my life's mission that clientelism must die, because that's the post-colony, right? And when you rid yourself of that, you can begin to build autonomy, non-alignment, strategic self-interest, etc. I think it's a long way from dead. When you look at the critical minerals deals being struck between the US and many countries on our continent, almost under the radar because we all have our eyes on the war. But certainly, I wish that will become an outcome, Adesua.
Charles, I want to ask your opinion before we round up very quickly on someone whose name we haven't heard or spoken about in a long time, but Traore. Traore signed America's deal for, the health deal that they have. Traore, who was being painted as a Sankara just last how many weeks ago? So this clientelism, who is whose boss? How do you feel about all of this in light of? Because I want to bring Terry in here.
It is the underlying weakness, and then because we're saying, this the lack of the great figures, because primarily he has failed to make his economy work. And you see the same thing with a lot of these countries that have got caught in that deal. They have nothing. So, it goes to the question of the agency politics. So the change that would come from that, they, just they are unable to fund, to fund the health system. So they are really willing to succumb. It was like you say, kind of really disappointing era. So the good that will come out of this is what Bob said. I think a lot of our guys will themselves not wean themselves off. I think that there just be no breast for them to suckle. And that is what we. Yeah.
that
They
that
have,
is a it's a shocking image.
That is such a bold statement coming from Charles.
Yeah. So that's what will finish them.
Fabulous.
the
it
mother
just,
the mother will have gone to work with the
Yes, the
food.
mother will have gone.
I hate to before we do our parting shots because I hate to disagree,
But
but I must.
Adesua, I know you want to finish this, but I think that very very quickly we need to touch on, because of all of these things happening, a story that I think may have just faded into the background: the strangulation of Cuba by the U.S.
Mm.
Uh, I think that's the tragic part of this conflict in the Middle East, that the headlines are the Cubans are being strangulated by a US blockade, having first of all taken away their only source of income, which was through Venezuela and oil and all, and now they've imposed a blockade on Cuba. And so the question is, I mean, first of all, the unfairness of it all and the inhumanity of it all. But then there is the question that for a president who said he didn't want to export wars and conflict, so how has this man become a hostage? Because that looks to me like his Florida cronies and the Marco Rubios and all of these guys who are busy trying to reverse the history of Cuba. I don't know. I don't know what you guys quickly think would like to say, but I mean, Cuba and Africa have a long history together. We drew a lot of inspiration from their leaders. We've
But
gotten
beyond
arms.
even, yeah, even beyond inspiration, Fidel Castro helped fight for Angola's independence. I believe they also defeated South Africa, the apartheid government's
Yes.
armed forces on two different occasions.
That's going to be my good event, and you'll see why.
Okay. So beyond just like mutual support of black and brown people, Cuba whooped the asses of racist white men historically. Currently,
Yes.
they built a healthcare system and doctors that serve the whole of the Caribbean due to their excellence. Cuba is what is happening to Cuba right now, and I think the first time I really experienced it because I didn't understand why the Cuban Latinos and the other Latinos in university were so in opposition to each other, right? Like the Cubans from Florida, from Miami, the very wealthy. When I met them for the first time, I didn't know the history behind that difference. So you're right with these Marco Rubios. There has always been a strong um, pressure group in the Republican Party that wanted this, that wanted Cuba, strangled and sanctions, that are very anti-black or anti-brown, who have basically immersed themselves into American society where they can pass for white at this point in time, and their politics have always leaned towards the Republican Party. And what we're seeing now is just that. It's that lobby having effect. It's the same way that Kent, the head of the counterintelligence in America, quit and said it's because the Israel lobby is winning. That Cuban lobby in America, that American Cuba lobby, is also winning in the Trump camp. Trump is a buffoon, if that's the nicest way I can think of how to describe him. He is a buffoon because he looks for easy wins. Right now his problem is that Iran is not going how he wants, and so he's looking to look as though he's a winner. It is part of his psychology, right? He needs to win big, have the big gold toilet. Like he needs, even his ship needs to go into 18-karat gold, right? It's part of his psychology. But the danger in putting someone with that type of psychology in charge of the biggest army in the world is what we are seeing now. And it's also why Iran is trying so hard to bait American boots on ground, because they want vengeance. I
Yes.
think they want vengeance and retribution, and they know the easiest way to get it is if they trap America into this. When you were discussing what the only disagreement I have with you and Charles, when you were talking about maybe the RSF realizing they wouldn't win, or maybe our leaders no longer, looking for mother's breast up and down, is that you are both thinking like reasonable, rational people. Most people don't like reasonable, rational people when it comes to these things. That's why you have leaders who can sell their people for pennies on the dollar, right? They think about themselves. They might not be able to get all the good, delicious things they were getting before, but if they can get just enough, and that's what we're seeing in Nigeria with the tax regime, with the extraction of resources here, with even the port deal. We've saved British steel. Do you know what it is for Nigeria to save British steel in 2026? 70 million pounds. They are so excited. They've never gotten an order that big. They were just in bankruptcy. Nigeria is saving British steel, and we have a steel mill which has not worked since I was born. Before I was born, I don't think there's one sheet of steel that has come out of Ajaokuta, and we're saving British steel. So that's the type of leadership we have. So even if we want them to think rationally, like, oh, we might lose, oh, I should cut my losses, we're dealing with so many personalities that do not think in a rational, reasonable way. And when it comes to Cuba, it is, for me, it's very painful. I've always like, because especially as you said, because of that Cuban African history, that joint history of fighting for liberation, fighting
Mhm.
for what's the word, self-determination, really, and in a world that punishes that, is very scary. But that's what I was going to say. I think, are we ready for Charles? Do you want to say some things about Cuba before we do our
No,
parting
no, no,
shots?
no, no. I think we can do. the parting shots.
Okay, Ferial, do you want to say anything before we do our parting shots?
Of course, I mean I've been to Cuba, and our country is deep solidarity with Cuban people. It was the best thing ever, and if there's just any way for you, there's lots of people to people solidarity with Cuba happening at the moment, and certainly I think we should get involved with that. My parting shot is two very quick ones. As part of those talks with South Sudan, we are looking at visa free access between the two countries. So,
No.
you guys always say Fortress South Africa. There you go. Sudan
The,
and
the
South
day you
Africa are
that
going to have
the
visa
day
free access.
the day you make that decision for Uganda is the day I will take you serious. We made huge sacrifices for your liberation. Up to
Quite.
today, nothing. So
I got you.
I
But I have to say what my other one, which I think you may like a little better. So there's some fresh surveys in which show that our man Jacob Zuma, he's probably going to be one of the runaway winners of the local election with his new MK party after
No.
wow,
our election, likely for November. More on that next time.
100%
Where
Zulu
in
boy.
KwaZulu Natal or
Because KwaZulu Natal, but
Oh
huge,
wow,
huge.
he's the new Kacha Butelezi, isn't he? So I guess that it's my turn.
Yes. Yes, Bob.
Okay. Uh Two things. One, I have been trying to avoid watching the news and all of these commentaries from the war in Iran, but I've now found a more beneficial reason to watch them. I have not sat in a class on strategy the way these guys are discussing the failings of Trump and the strategy of Iran. It is amazing when you forget all the happenings on the ground, when you listen to the analysts and why this is not a plan and how a plan is supposed to be. What and I am like, yes, finally, I am now able to have a free lesson in strategy. So that's one. Now, Furio, this one, this is my other good event of the week. I have gone back to reading two books I bought long ago about a story that I think I needed to understand better. So I'm going to show them to you.
Hmm. Quito. Hmm.
The Bush War. What's the other one say?
So, you were talking about Cuba fighting and liberating South Africa. The most famous reason why eventually the South African army gave up was the Battle of Quito Valley. So this is in Angola. But the reason I'm reading both of them concurrently and simultaneously is because this one here is the account of the Soviet Russian troops who were in Angola. This one
Oh.
is by a British journalist who was sympathetic to UNITA and had contacts in South Africa. So I'll end up with a balanced picture.
No danger of the single story there. Very good.
No, but I think also the interesting thing out of this is how what I wanted to find out is how people who are militarily superior are
Mm.
able to achieve military objectives on the ground but lose the political intention. So that's why I really am interested in going back to a story from nearly 40 years ago.
Please send
Okay.
me the pictures of that
yeah,
because I'll be very
yeah.
interested in reading that. Let me do my parting shot so that Charles can close us out
Oh, okay.
for the
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
So my parting shot is for Emily Gregory, who is the Democrat that has just won the special elections in Florida and Palm Beach. She has flipped the seat from Republican to Democrat. Now, of course, Palm Beach is where Trump is registered, is where he resides. That's where Mar-a-Lago is. She is
Mhm.
leading the first time, running for the first time. She's a military spouse because she's a woman. She's young, and also it for me this is a good thing. It's good to flip any red seat blue, in my opinion, at this point in time. But also, it shows why Trump might be getting skittish heading towards the midterms and why he's looking for an out from this Iran war that's not going according to plan. Because if they can lose Palm Beach, that means anything might be up for grabs. Now, do I think the Democrats will do much with this? No, no. They are so. The Democrats remind me of Nigerian opposition politicians. Like they always act like they're playing with Play-Doh. Like I'm always like, do you know how serious this is? Do you like? Do you can you wake up? But Trump has lost his own rep is now a Democrat, and I think it shows it's following what we're seeing, which that the Dems have been able to flip quite a few seats from red to blue, and we'll see how that goes for the midterms. But if we have more Dems in the House, we might be able to see some of Trump's worst, impulses get locked by Congress. So that's exciting for us who have to deal with higher petrol prices due to Trump's impulses.
Okay, so
Okay.
I have two. One of them is that in Kenya here, the Kenya Gen Z. We have we spoke about their story, but they have done something very exciting, which other young Africans can look at. They have launched something they call the Nico Card movement. The Nico Card is register to vote, and but the interesting thing about that, they're doing this viral video, and in real life, now you can't, you are you are not allowed to parties, or you might not even get a date if you don't flash your voter card as a Gen
no,
Z.
no, no girl will allow to go out with you.
Yes. So the result is that in some of these cities like Nairobi and Mombasa, voter registration amongst the young people has really spiked. So they have used formal as a powerful registration tool. So that's interesting. But the other one comes from Nigeria. And there is this story I read out of Nigeria. There is a Nigerian witch doctor in Ogun State. He advertised that he was selling his juju shrine, and he said his juju shrine has the power of 12 gods. Now, now, now comes the interesting part.
Charles, why do you do this to me?
Why? Why? And I think he was selling it for 9.6 million naira. So the question is, why was he selling his shrine? Because he is relocating to Canada for green pasture.
Oh, terrible.
So I was
That's a good enough advertisement for most Nigerians. They will buy that shrine just to get.
in fact, I was looking whether someone has bought it, but if it couldn't make the owner rich, that he has to go to Canada to be a security guard, who would buy it? But I mean, it just made my day.
I did mention this. I know, Charles, I said you get the last parting shot, but I do think that the two stories that are connected and important. South Africa reburying the remains of 63 Khoi and San people after they were dug up and sent to Europe for research, and Nigeria receiving Bini bronzes from Switzerland. I think like amidst all that's going on, this conversation that we've had today is very important about history and returning things, what we own, what we hold, and what we treasure and honor. So that, I think, they give them dignified burials in South Africa, and we are trying to receive our bronzes back. As a Bini girl, it was a, I don't want to use the word mindfuck for me, that the first time I saw a collection of Bini bronzes was in London, and and so I think it's something that we'll continue to see. But thank you, everyone.